Hey guys, it's Luca from Learning FTG, and today I want to talk about reserve list cards and basically why I think they're kind of like overrated. So, reserve list cards overrated? I mean, basically, I can tell you in my portfolio of Magic cards, I've invested in reserve list. So I do own a lot of reserve list cards. Reserve list, sealed product, and foils, but they're like old border. So this is pretty much all the stuff I've invested in, and I think the concept of a reserve list is important. Like these all have the same quality in common, right? Which is like you can't make this stuff again. If a card's on the reserve list, it can't be printed again. If you've got a sealed box of Invasion or Onslaught or Legions or Nemesis, which I happen to have all of these, they can't just make more boxes of the stuff. So it's got like a limited supply. So if you assume that demand stays the same or increases over the time, then the products, the cards, they have to either maintain their value or increase in value. And you're kind of, safe from inflation and stuff. Same thing with foils, right? So if someone really wants like a foil Cloud of Fairies or a foil Deranged Hermit or whatever from the original set, in the old border foil, you can't, maybe they could make, like a Time Spiral remastered with the old border, but it wouldn't be like that original set. And so that's kind of the crux of what I'm going to talk about today is like what is it that, why is reserve list good? Um, in my opinion, reserve list is a little bit of like an old paradigm. Like why are some reserve list cards like a lot of dollars and others are cheap? And I think it's like the playability factor. If you think about a Wheel of Fortune, a Dual Land, Grim Monolith, like these cards are really expensive because people want to play them in EDH. Something like a what's like a really bad reserve list card is like Narwhale or Didgeridoo, or those like reserve list cards. No one really needs those. Yes, they can't print anymore. There's a fixed supply, but demand is so low that it's almost irrelevant that the supply is fixed, right? In any market, you need you need demand to outpace supply by a significant amount for something to be worth anything, right? You can think about like air. Like we don't buy or sell air because it's so plentiful. But if there was a shortage of oxygen, then all of a sudden air becomes really expensive. It's the same thing with Magic cards. The vast majority of Magic cards are worthless. They're pretty much at bulk prices because people just don't need that many. Like if you look at Magic Online, for example, so many cards on Magic Online are worthless. Um, and that's because it's very clear, how much supply versus how much demand there is. If there's like 50 people that need one copy of a card and there's 5,000 cards available, the card's going to be worth basically zero. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. So basically, these reserve list cards that people that have a lot of value, it's because of their playability, not collectability. In general, when we think of reserve list cards, right? Because we're thinking about it not being able to be reprinted. Let's think about like a Soul Ring, for example. So Soul Ring's not on the reserve list. It can be reprinted. But an old version of Soul Ring is like that's like the OG version. If you're gonna get like a BGS 9 beta Soul Ring, right? Do you care that it's on the reserve list or not? And I realize it's probably got cut off, so let me write it again. So let's say you have a BGS 9 beta Soul Ring. Does it matter if this is on the reserve list or not? It's not on the reserve list, but does that matter? If they print a new Commander Soul Ring, is it going to affect the price of this BGS 9 beta Soul Ring? The answer is no. So, this brings up the topic of what I would call like pseudo reserve list. To me, a beta BGS 9 Soul Ring is like a pseudo reserve list because yeah, you can reprint Soul Ring, you can make new versions of the card Soul Ring, but it's not gonna affect the old price because you can't reprint a beta Soul Ring, right? So that's kind of like what I'm getting at with this video is that I think people are way too focused on reserve list. Is it on the reserve list? Is it not on the reserve list? What you really have to think about is, can they reprint a new copy that will affect the price of the old copy? And so for me, things that are pseudo reserve lists are like old border foils, original printings, and this isn't true for every card, right? And the reason why is because these are for collectibles. These are not for playables. Okay, so in a previous video, I talked about the shift from Magic. We're moving from the price of a card being based on its playability, and now that price is no longer really based on playability. No one really cares how playable your beta Soul Ring is. It's really on collectability. Do people think a beta Soul Ring is cool? And is it rare? Rarity, right? So we're having this kind of like paradigm shift where a card is no longer really evaluated based on its playability. Now it's evaluated based on its collectability, its rarity. So in the old way of doing things, reserve list mattered, right? It matters. Because if I've got a Wheel of Fortune, and let's say it's really good that's a bad example, right? Let's say like a Grim Monolith. And Grim Monolith is really playable in Legacy, and I'm telling you, this is a Legacy staple, even though it's not really a Legacy staple, but let's just say it is. Okay, and now the fact that it's a reserve list, the fact that it can't be printed, yeah, it is going to be worth a lot, because there's people that want to play with that card, and if a new version was printed, it would affect the price of the old card because people need them for tournaments. People that are using a card for its playability don't care what version of card it is. But as we move into a world of collectability, where people are concerned with, I want to have the old printing of it, I want to have it, be from a specific set, I want it be graded, I want it to be a 9.5 from this set. It doesn't matter. If you make a new version of the card, who cares? If you make a new Judge foil, who cares, right? So I think like we're moving into a place where reserve list doesn't matter, right? Because basically we're talking about old cards. The only cards that would be on the reserve list are old cards. And for these old cards, like their prices are not really based on their playability anymore. And it's interesting, like I think people forget why Black Lotus and the Moxes and Time Walk and Time Twister were so valuable in the past. It wasn't, and it's totally different now. In the past, people wanted to use them in Vintage. I remember having Vintage tournaments every once in a while, and it was really hard to get these cards, and they were really good. Like your deck was way better when you had them. Now, 99% of people that are going after the Power 9, they're like putting it up on their wall or whatever, right? Like it's a total collectible thing because it's meaningful to them. It's like a piece of history. No one's like getting these Power 9s to play in Vintage tournaments. It's totally different. And so when we switch into that world where we don't really care about using a card in a tournament, we just care about its collectability aspect, making reprints, it doesn't end up being such a big deal anymore. Even if they made, from the vault Power 9 and they just printed a bunch of Power 9 from the vault, do you think that would affect the value of a beta Time Walk? Absolutely not, right? So I think we need to not be so focused on reserve list. I think people are way too like tunnel vision on, it's a reserve list, so it's got to be worth a lot. Not really. And so what are some of my predictions? So let's make some predictions. Okay, so I think a lot of reserve list cards are in a sort of bubble, right? So let's pick like two cards from the same set. One's reserve list, one's not, right? Let me try to find an example. So I'm on Goldfish, and I like to focus on Urza's Legacy foils because that's kind of my thing lately. So let's go to Urza's Legacy. And let's go to the foil cards. Okay, so we've got, Palancron, reserve list card. Memory Jar, reserve list card. These cards are actually, like, good cards. Multani Morrow's Sorcerer. That's a reserve list card. What is it? Okay, this is a good example. Weatherseed Treefolk is garbage. This card is terrible, but it's a reserve list. So it's worth more than, like, a Defense of the Heart, right? Is this reserve list? Doesn't look like it. How do I tell if it's a reserve list? Come on. So MTG Goldfish is not being very helpful. Let's see, if I go to the non-foil version. Okay, so it tells me reserve list there if I go to the non-foil, so let me go to the non-foil for this one. It looks like they reprinted it, so this one's not. So what I'm gonna say is like, okay, right now, a foil Weatherseed Treefolk is 352. A foil Defense of the Heart is 348. Like this is like, it's too expensive. Like people are overvaluing the Treefolk because it's reserve list as opposed to Defense of the Heart. Like, does anyone really care? Like, will a new copy of Defense of the Heart affect the price of the old one from a collectability standpoint? I don't think so, right? And I'm talking about like high end, like BGS 9 foil Defense of the Heart versus a BGS 9 foil Weatherseed Treefolk. Maybe you can make an argument that, if you're just trying to find like a near mint foil copy for your EDH deck, and then they reprint it, yeah, that's gonna bring it. But still, like, this card is unplayable. So my prediction will be like, 10 years from now, Defense of the Heart will be worth a lot more than Weatherseed Treefolk, and Weatherseed Treefolk will be worth about, whatever like the bad rares from this set are worth, like an Eviscerator. I don't see any reason why Eviscerator and Weatherseed Treefolk should have a different price tag. They're both pretty much like useless foil rares from Urza's Legacy. So that's my prediction. Basically, it'll drift to the same price as Eviscerator, and maybe in 10 years, a foil rare from Urza's Legacy will be worth like $1,000. So maybe they'll both be 1,000, and then Defense of the Heart will be like 2,000. So it'll be worth like twice this. So that's my prediction. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Basically, my thoughts on reserve lists and why I don't think you should focus too heavily on reserve lists, especially now when everyone else is focusing on it. I think we are in sort of a bubble. And in fact, I may, if I'm not lazy, sell some of my reserve list cards right now and buy cards that are the pseudo reserve list. So for me, pseudo reserve list is like, is basically like graded old stuff. Because people are collecting sets, they're collecting the old versions of cards, and they don't care if a new copy gets released from a new set. It's not going to affect these old prices. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.